What we're going to take a look at now is how governments originally formed. And we're going to look at four explanations for how early governments formed and like how they came to be. So like where did government come from? So the first theory about the formation of governments is called the force theory. And this is the idea that as one group, society, individual conquered like another group or society, they had a force order upon them and they just sort of instilled their rules and regulations upon the new group that they conquered. And this is sort of how like government sort of like spread into like larger territories. You think of examples of like global conquerors, where there was like Genghis Khan, who in like the 1100s like unified many of like the nomadic tribes like in like northeast Asia, right? Or think about like Napoleon, the French leader who conquered a decent amount of territory in Europe in the early 1800s. As they conquered other areas, like they spread their ideas upon the people that they were conquering. Thus, like government began to spread. Another idea is called evolutionary theory, and this is the idea that like the first rules and regulations on how to live were actually like family based. They were like family rules and regulations, and we're going like way back, right? And as these families began to grow larger and they began to branch out, they began to spread, like these systems of organization and of rules began to spread as well. So it's the idea that the first governments actually stemmed from like families as they grew and as they spread. The third theory is called divine right theory. This is one that you might have talked about last year when you looked at like European history. And it's the idea that like leaders actually come into being and they take power because they've received like permission or blessing from God to do so, to impose their rules. Like they have religious authority to do this. And again, this was popular for many of the European monarchs to sort of like claim that they had permission to instill their rules and regulations upon the people because like a higher being, religious being, gave them permission to do that. So again, you see like the flow chart on the right where you have like God on top, and then the monarch right underneath them, and then like other wealthy leaders beneath them, and then obviously a mass amount of like common people on the bottom, sort of like taking orders from all those above. And the last one, which is definitely most relevant to sort of like the American system of government, is what's called the social contract theory. This was first like mentioned by name in 1689 by the guy pictured on the screen. His name is John Locke, famous British philosopher. He wrote a second treatise on government in 1689. And one of the things that he looked at was like, why did people join a government? And one of the things he focused on was that the original men basically had complete freedom. So, like, why would they have given up some of that freedom in order to join a government where, like, people that are in a government don't have complete freedom? They have to follow rules and regulations. So, like, why would have people voluntarily given up their freedom? And one of the things that Locke focused on was that there was a contract, an agreement between these people that joined government and the government itself. That people joined government and they voluntarily gave up some of their freedom because they knew they couldn't protect themselves. And that by joining a government and its rules, that the government would help protect their life, their liberty, and their property. So that's why they voluntarily joined a government. But the second part of Locke's theory, social contract theory, is that if people are going to give up some of their freedoms to join the government, if the government ever goes against the deal and they start violating like your life, your liberty, and your property, then citizens have a right to actually abolish that government and form another one. So that's the contract that exists. You give up some of your freedom in exchange for protection. And if the government violates this contract, you can revolt. This should sound familiar because this is the entire premise for our Declaration of Independence. If you took a chance or a second and you read the actual intro to the Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson, it basically says that we join governments because governments protect your life, your liberty, and he changed the pursuit of happiness instead of property, that Locke said. And that if government ever becomes destructive to these ends, you have a right to abolish it and form a new system of government. And that's what the entire Declaration of Independence is based on, which is the British government violated the social contract theory and the colonists were justified in creating a new system of government.